Earlier this year my husband, 31M, and I decided to spend Christmas with his family for the first time since my daughter was born last September. Since they live 12 hours away, we decided to stay for a few weeks before Christmas so they could spend loads of time with Annie of 13 months. We arrived early like we planned and everything was great. I've had a few disagreements with my mother-in-law Trish, 56F, in the past over my parenting style. She criticized me for using disposable diapers, buying baby food from the supermarket and not raising Annie as an organics baby, but everything seemed great. After a day or two settling in, my husband and I decided to pick up a few gifts from a mall around an hour away before the last-minute rush kicked in. My father-in-law, 60M, tagged along. Trish said she was happy to take care of Annie. We got back a few hours later and Annie was down for a nap on a blanket I didn't recognize. Trish said one of her friends dropped by and gave it as an early Christmas gift. It looked pretty old/worn, but I figured one of her hippie friends was just recycling it. The next 2 weeks were fine, aside from Trish making a point to prepare meals for Annie from scratch. I mentioned this to my husband and he said to just let her be. Annie mostly mushed the food Trish gave her with her hands through the bowls on the floor, as she's been doing at the moment. Trish said it would take her a while to get used to nutritious meals. I was getting sick of her meddling, but it was only for a few weeks, so for the sake of the holidays I let it slide. The day after Christmas Annie was really unsettled and wouldn't stop fidgeting and crying. I took her temperature and she had a fever, so I kept an eye on her for the next few days and it thankfully started to go down. This morning, she started to get a rash and blisters on her arms and legs and I freaked out. I was packing a bag to drive to see a doctor when Trish asked where I was going. I told her Annie had a rash and I was taking her to see a doctor. She got a weird smug smile on her face and told me there was nothing to worry about. When I asked her what she was talking about, she said without even looking at Annie that what she had was just chickenpox. I asked her how she could possibly know that and she casually admitted one of her friend's grandkids had chickenpox a few weeks ago, so she asked them to wipe a blanket over the child's arms, legs and face and bring it to her house. At this point I couldn't believe what I was hearing, so I asked if that blanket was the gift Annie was sleeping on. She said it was. I lost my shit. To be honest, I don't really remember what I said because I was up most of the night for 2 days checking on Annie. I just unleashed on Trish asking what the fudge was wrong with her. My husband and father-in-law came to try to calm things down and Trish dug in her heels and said chickenpox was the best and most natural thing for Annie to build up her immunity. I already have a vaccination schedule in place with my pediatrician and she was booked in to get immunized for chickenpox at 18 months. We drove to see the doctor and he confirmed she had it. He said I'll have to cut Annie's nails short and might have to tape socks on her hands while she sleeps because kids so young can scratch until they bleed and that will leave scars. On the drive back my husband started making excuses for Trish, that she was only doing what she thought was best. I couldn't believe he was defending her and we fought most of the way home until I told him to stop talking to me. Annie's been scratching like crazy and I just had to tape socks over her hands. Trish tried to talk to me when we got back and I told her to get out of my sight. We were meant to stay until Wednesday, but I just finished packing up our stuff so we can leave first thing in the morning. I'm so angry I can't even think. Whenever I hear Trish moving around in the kitchen my heart starts beating faster and I feel like going out there and grabbing her by the hair. I don't ever want to see her again or let my daughter see her again. What can I say to make her and my husband realize the enormity of what she's done? I don't think I can speak coherently to their faces until Annie gets better. TLDR, mother-in-law deliberately infected my daughter with chickenpox. I'm so angry, I feel like physically harming her. I need advice on what to say to make her realize what she's done. Relevant comments. When asked why her daughter wasn't vaccinated for chickenpox. She's up to date on her vaccination schedule. She was vaccinated for measles a month ago and booked in to get the chickenpox jab at 18 months old, as normal. Top comments. Commenter. If someone did this to my child, deliberately infecting them with a disease without discussing it with me, with the malicious intent of undermining my parenting to teach me a lesson, they never see my child for extended periods or unsupervised again. Commenter. Your husband better step up and act like a father and stop acting like a son. Update 1. Thank you to everyone for your comments, inbox messages and advice after my original post. I read all the comments and messages, and they genuinely helped, especially the home remedies on how to stop itching. Since my first post was locked and deleted, I hope it's okay to briefly summarize here. Over the holidays my mother-in-law Trish, 56F, deliberately infected my daughter Annie, 1F, with chickenpox by wrapping her in an infected blanket while she was left alone with her for several hours. Trish didn't tell anyone what she had done until Annie came down with a horrible fever and rash. Annie was booked in for her chickenpox vaccination at 18 months, but Trish thought what she did is 100% normal, despite the fact it's caused Annie significant pain and distress, and now scarring to her face and arms. When I found out what she did, I was livid and had a shouting match with her and packed up our things to leave the very next morning. It soon came out my husband Jack didn't think Trish had done anything wrong. On to the update. I didn't think it would be possible, but things got worse. I got up first thing the next morning and started packing our stuff into the car. Once I opened it up, I kept the keys in my pocket since I was going in and out. Usually we use Jack's set and leave mine in my bag. While I was packing, he sat in the kitchen with Trish and my father-in-law, 60M, and chatted and had coffee like nothing was wrong. Annie was mercifully still asleep, so I just gently belted her in and closed her door when Jack came out and asked if I had everything. I said we were good to go as soon as he was. He said okay, and calmly took out his key set and centrally locked the car, locking Annie in. I asked him what the hell he was doing, and he said we wouldn't be leaving until I apologized to Trish. I think I was stunned into silence because he then took the chance to rehash what he said the previous day, that Trish thought she was doing what was best, that chickenpox doesn't kill you, and that I was making a bigger deal out of this than I needed to and making Trish feel bad. Yes, making her feel bad. All the comments from my last post were swirling around in my head, and I told him he needs to stop being a son and start being a father. He screwed up his face and said he would always be Trish's son, and that was the point, that nobody should speak to his mother the way I had the day before, and I needed to apologize to clear the air. I felt like I had entered some kind of weird twilight zone where I had accidentally married a 9-year-old instead of an adult man, so I just asked him to open the car so we could leave. He repeatedly refused, then walked back inside and said he would see me in there when I was acting more reasonable. You can probably guess what happened next. I'd left my bag on the passenger seat, so he probably assumed my keys were in there. Nope. I waited 30 seconds, then just hopped into the car and drove away. My phone blew up with a million calls from him, Trish, and my father-in-law. Eventually, my mom and dad and my sister Jess, who I'm super close with, called as well. I'd briefly texted Jess about what was happening the day before, but she was stunned to get the full blow-by-blow. By the time I was on the open road, I asked her to phone Jack and tell him he could walk home for all I care. Once she heard my side of the story, and not Jack's, which was apparently that I had gone crazy, frightened Trish, snatched Annie and it sped away, she calmed way down. Mom, Dad, and Jess offered to start driving and meet me halfway so I could switch with one of them and wouldn't have to drive the full 12 hours by myself in one day. I was so grateful to see them. I pretty much broke down in a truck stop parking lot while I blubbered that I loved them. They all took turns driving while I had a rest. It was super reassuring to talk it over and hear that Trish and Jack are the unreasonable ones. Once we got back, I stayed at my parents' overnight and they said I could stay as long as I needed. The next few days were fairly tense. I was up most of the night making sure Annie didn't scratch, which she did anyway, somehow, and it seemed like she just cried and cried and cried until she was exhausted. She has 5 scars on her face and a few others on her arms from scratching. I know appearances shouldn't matter, but I'm so angry her skin is marked for life now over some stupid bullshit. This whole thing is just something I never expected to happen. I answered one of Jack's calls only to have him start a rant that he didn't recognize this person I had become, so I hung up on him. He was due to come back for the start of the work year, which I wasn't looking forward to, but I figured we could make it work as long as Trish was 12 hours away. Then at like 11 p.m. one night, I got a very short and formal text from father-in-law via Jack's phone, saying Trish had come down with shingles and was in the emergency room, that Jack was staying there to care for her, and that he would work from their house remotely once the year started back up. Jack's been there for the past few weeks tending to Mama's every whim. I'm sure she's put on an Oscar-worthy performance of having one foot in the grave, and according to Google it should be any day now that her painful, crusty pustules go gently into that sweet night. A few weeks ago I was honestly so tired and overwhelmed and in disbelief that I didn't know what to do. Now I'm back at home with people who actually care about me. I think I'm starting to realize how lucky I am to see the weird relationship with his mommy this early on. The fact that he cares more about Trish than his own daughter speaks volumes. When he eventually comes back, I think we'll have to have a serious talk about our future together. TLDR, mother-in-law infects my 1-year-old with chickenpox on purpose. Husband supports his mommy. He tries to force me to apologize to her by locking our daughter in the car, but I peace out with a spare set of keys. Husband has barely spoken to me in the weeks since. Mother-in-law came down with shingles, so he's staying with her to nurse her back to health. I don't think any amount of TLC can do the same for our relationship now I've seen the real him. Few. Top comments. Commenter. He locked your daughter in the car, holy shit. And assumed you wouldn't be able to get her out. I mean, that was why he locked her in, to threaten you. Holy shit. Good on you for dipping out of there after that. Whatever happens with your marriage moving forward, you seem to have your parenting priorities straight. Good luck, and I hope Annie feels better soon. Commenter.
Yeah,
this. He locked a sick baby in the car. Kudos to OP for handling that with a cool head because I would have lost my shit. Commenter. That is fudging terrifying behavior out of him. That poor baby is going to grow up with that as a father. Commenter. You only get shingles if you've had chickenpox, the new jab prevents it. Rather ironic. I'd get divorce papers served before Mummy Dearest decides your daughter should become a breatharian or join Scientology. Update 2. Hey, everyone, I'm back. If you missed the original or the first update, long story short, my mother-in-law, Trish, deliberately infected my 1-year-old daughter, Annie, with chickenpox over the holidays. My husband, Jack, decided to side with his mommy, locking our sick baby in the car to force me to apologize to her. I left, and he's been taking care of Trish, who conveniently came down with shingles shortly after. Well, after a few weeks of silence, Jack finally texted me last night. He didn't ask how Annie was doing. Nope. Instead, he told me that Trish was feeling much better and asked when I was coming back home. The way he framed it, like I was the one on some extended vacation, had me seeing red. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I called my lawyer. Yes, I went there. I didn't think I'd ever be this person, the one talking about custody arrangements and dividing assets, but here I am. The kicker? The lawyer told me I had a solid case for full custody if I wanted to go that route, considering Jack's little stunt with the car. She even said I could file for an emergency order to keep him from taking Annie back to Trish's house. I mulled it over for about 5 minutes before deciding to pull the trigger. I mean, this is the guy who thought it was okay to use our daughter as a pawn in his weird power play with his mom. What's next? Him insisting we baptize her in some holy spring that Trish swears by? Or maybe he'll take parenting advice from some Facebook group Trish is part of, where they believe in feeding kids dirt for immunity boosting. Anyway, I didn't tell Jack about the lawyer. Instead, I sent him a short, icy text, "We'll talk when you get back." No mention of when, or if, I'd return. Just enough to keep him on his toes. This morning, I got a frantic call from Jess, my sister. Apparently, Jack called her, trying to get info on where I stood. He sounded panicked, according to her, like he knew he was losing control of the situation. She played dumb, bless her, just said that she didn't know much because I'd been so distracted with Annie's health. When she told me this, I couldn't help but laugh. It's kind of pathetic, really, him running to my sister for answers, like she's going to spill my secrets. But here's where things get wild. Right after I hung up with Jess, I got a text from my father-in-law. He's always been quiet, the type to let Trish run the show. But this text? It was an essay. He apologized for Trish's actions, said he didn't agree with her methods, and that he was concerned about the way Jack handled things with the car. He even offered to help with any transition, if I needed it, whatever that means. So now I'm sitting here, staring at my phone, wondering if he's covering his own ass because he knows what's coming. Or maybe he's finally growing a spine after decades of letting Trish bulldoze everyone. Either way, it's too little, too late. Jack's supposed to come back in a few days. I don't know how that conversation is going to go, but I do know one thing, I'm not the same person I was before all this happened. Trish might have won some twisted battle with her chickenpox stunt, but she lost the war. And Jack? Well, let's just say he's about to find out what happens when you put your mother before your wife and daughter. I don't know where this will end, but I do know one thing, I'm not backing down. Not this time. Update 3. Hey, Reddit. I didn't think I'd be back so soon, but things escalated quicker than I expected. Strap in, because this is a wild one. Jack came home yesterday. No warning, no heads up. I was in the middle of feeding Annie when I heard his key in the door. My heart just dropped into my stomach. I hadn't prepared what I was going to say or how I was going to say it. I was half tempted to grab Annie and bolt out the back door, but I'm done running. This is my home too. He walked in like nothing had happened, just set his bag down and came straight for Annie. I swear, I've never seen someone switch from casual to over-the-top doting so fast. He was all, "Hey, sweetheart. Daddy missed you," like the past few weeks of silence didn't happen. Annie, bless her, gave him this blank stare like, "Who are you again?" I had to stifle a laugh. But then he turned to me, and his smile vanished. "We need to talk," he said, like I hadn't been waiting for this moment for days. I told him to sit down. I wasn't going to let him dictate the terms of this conversation. He sat, but I could tell he was annoyed by the way he kept tapping his foot and glancing at the door like he was already planning his escape. Too bad for him, because I wasn't going to let him weasel out of this one. I started by telling him straight up that I knew he had been minimizing what happened with Trish. I told him I wasn't going to accept any excuses or half-assed apologies anymore. If he couldn't see what was wrong with what he did locking our sick daughter in the car to try and manipulate me, then we had nothing left to discuss. He just sat there, staring at me like I had grown two heads. Then he said, "Are you really going to blow up our marriage over something so small?" I couldn't believe it. Small? Infecting our child with a disease? Locking her in the car to win a petty argument? I laid it all out for him again, hoping it would finally sink in. But all he did was sigh and say, "This is how families are. You're overreacting." That's when I knew it was over. You know that feeling when you realize you've been holding on to something that's already dead? That was me. I wasn't sad anymore, just done. So I told him. I said, "I've spoken to a lawyer. We're separating, Jack. You can keep playing the good son, but you've lost me and Annie." He didn't take it well. At first, he tried to laugh it off like I was joking. When he realized I was serious, he got angry. He started pacing the room, ranting about how I was tearing our family apart and how I was being unreasonable. I let him vent for a bit, but when he started getting louder, I picked up Annie and calmly told him to stop. That's when he did something I didn't expect. He threw his hands up and said, "Fine. You want to ruin everything? Go ahead. But you'll regret this, and so will she." And then, before I could even react, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I just stood there, holding Annie, my heart racing. His words echoed in my head, "You'll regret this." I didn't know what to do. I called Jess, and she was ready to come over immediately, but I told her to hold off. I needed a minute to process. I wasn't afraid of Jack hurting me or Annie, but the way he left. It didn't sit right. Later that evening, I got a call from my lawyer. She said Jack had already contacted his own lawyer and that they'd be pushing for shared custody. I expected this, but it still stung. The lawyer also mentioned that Jack seemed eager to settle things quickly, which made me suspicious. What was he planning? Then, this morning, I found out. I got a message from one of Jack's cousins, one of the few people in his family who actually has some sense. She said that Trish had been spreading rumors that I was unstable and dangerous, and that she'd convinced Jack to try and push for full custody of Annie. Yup. You heard that right. The woman who deliberately infected my child with a virus is now trying to paint me as the bad guy. I'm furious, but more than that, I'm ready. I've got all the documentation I need, the medical records, texts, everything. Trish can try whatever she wants, but I'm not backing down. Jack can play the dutiful son all he wants, but when it comes to Annie, I'll fight tooth and nail. The next step is court. I didn't want it to come to this, but here we are. I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know this, I'm not going to let them take Annie away from me. Not now, not ever. Update 4. After my last update, things moved too fast, honestly. The day after I found out Trish was spreading lies about me, I got an emergency call from my lawyer. Jack had filed for full custody. The court date was set, and I had less than a week to prepare. My heart dropped, but I knew I had to act. I gathered every piece of evidence I had. The texts, the doctor's report, even that smug voicemail Trish left after I first stormed out "You'll thank me someday." It all went into a thick file. My lawyer was a rock star, tearing apart every baseless claim Jack's side tried to throw at us. Trish's rumors? Easily debunked. The unstable narrative? Blown to bits by the fact that I'd been Annie's primary caregiver since day one, with not a single incident. The courtroom was intense. Jack sat there, stone-faced, with Trish beside him. She had the audacity to smile at me when I walked in, like she'd already won. I ignored her and focused on what mattered: Annie. When it was my turn to speak, I laid it all out. How Trish had deliberately infected my daughter with chickenpox. How Jack had locked Annie in the car to manipulate me. How, when Annie needed him most, he ran back to his mother instead of being a father. The judge's face said it all: disgust, disbelief, and, most importantly, sympathy. Then came the bombshell. Just as the judge was about to wrap things up, my lawyer called a surprise witness, Jack's cousin. The one who'd warned me about Trish. She testified that Trish had been bragging about her plan to toughen Annie up by exposing her to chickenpox. The courtroom went dead silent. Jack looked like he'd seen a ghost. The judge didn't need much more after that. He ruled in my favor, granting me full custody and restricting Trish's access to supervised visits only. Jack's face fell as the realization hit him that he'd just lost, not only the case, but his family. When the gavel finally came down, I felt a wave of relief so powerful I nearly cried. I walked out of that courtroom with my head held high, Annie in my arms, knowing we were finally free of Trish's toxic grip. As for Jack, he tried to talk to me outside, but I didn't give him the chance. I told him that until he could prioritize his daughter over his mother, he had nothing to say to me. I'm done with this nightmare. Annie and I are moving forward without the shadow of Trish or Jack looming over us. So that's it, Reddit. It's been a wild ride, but I'm closing this chapter. Annie deserves a life full of love and safety, and that's exactly what I'm going to give her.